This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to episode 219 of Geek Leader Podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. Today's sponsor is Private Internet Access. If you've ever surfed the web and wanted to do it securely, especially when you're traveling or using someone else's network, you definitely need private internet access. Private internet access allows you to have a secure VPN without them logging what data what you're doing, what transactions you're making, or anything like that, to connect to anywhere in the world. You can also change your default location so it appears as if you're coming from a different place. Why is this helpful, you say? If you're not doing anything nefarious, well, it's really helpful if you want to test DNS resolution from different places and different time zones. It's a really cool tool, and it's not very expensive at all. You can get plans starting at $3.99 a month, and you can find out more by going to geekleader.com/VPN. Again, that's geekleader.com/VPN. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, we've got Daniel Faggella. He is the founder and head of research at Emerj Artificial Intelligence Research, and he's a globally recognized speaker. Talks about the use cases, the business ROI, and all the good stuff, some of the scary stuff about artificial intelligence in business, and I'm really excited to talk about that. He's also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, which is kind of interesting and fascinating to me as I am, early on in my martial arts journey, but it's kind of an intriguing side note. But anyway, with all that being said, Daniel, welcome to the show.
Hey, John, glad to be here with you, man.
Hey, if you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about how you got to where you are today and what excited you and made you interested in artificial intelligence, just so we can have some context for our conversation.
Sure, yeah. So I run as you mentioned, Emerj Artificial Intelligence Research. So your listeners can think about us kind of like a Forrester or a Gartner, like a market research company, but specifically around the ROI of AI. So we help enterprise leaders or consultants or vendor companies with kind of making sense of their AI journey. So helping them build strategies and for the smaller companies, helping them go to market. But oddly enough, John, I don't have an IT background or kind of a career like you do, or even a consulting or a business background. As you had mentioned, I'm a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, but my job, honestly, since I was an undergrad, was actually teaching martial arts. So I started a martial arts gym when I was 20 years old. I have not really been employed since I was a teenager. And to make the leap from that into artificial intelligence market research was kind of a wild one. So the way it happened is I was interested in studying human learning, John. So how do neurons actually learn skills? So I went to the University of Pennsylvania for graduate school to study cognitive science, specifically in skill development and skill acquisition. Mm-hmm. And while I was there, I was getting tapped on the shoulder by the folks in computer science who were saying, hey, you're studying all this adult learning, but you should really check out machine learning. And this is the really early days, John, of natural language processing and chatbots and sentiment analysis, the really early days of computer vision when computers were just getting better at identifying, flowers and insects, better than human beings in terms of speed. And so this was kind of an early period of excitement. And by the time I graduated with my degree, it became very evident to me that as fascinated as I was with the brain, what was going to happen in silicon over the course of the next 20 years would be radically transformative for business and for day-to-day human life, and that I needed to get involved. And so it was right around then, some 9 long years ago, when I said, I want to study this stuff, I want to understand its impact, and I want that to be my life. So I've grown and sold a couple companies in the interim, but for the last 9 years, I've spent a good amount of time speaking and interviewing folks in the AI world, and now I'm lucky enough to be growing a great team and doing it for a living.
So what are some of the use cases for AI? Because I've heard so many like crazy stuff out there, where somebody has created deepfakes and things like that can do stuff. There's also AIs that can generate articles and text. And, is there a risk for my podcast being completely ran by AI in the next couple of years? In my voice, scanning things and interviewing people without me being there?
Not in the near term, although I have, if anybody wants to scare themselves a little bit, you can go and Google programmatically generated everything. If you type that into Google, you're going to find some of my articles about that topic. So I was fortunate enough to speak at United Nations headquarters about deepfakes. So when when the UN was kind of interested in what are the security implications of this technology, they actually called us in to give a presentation in New York at headquarters. And deepfakes are really a smaller microcosm of a much broader dynamic of programmatically generated content, whether that be audio, video, image, eventually logo design, architectural design. There's a lot of interesting and novel use cases for that. But we are quite a whiles away here, John, from an AI being able to ask informative and interesting questions. And frankly, we're quite a bit away from it being able to indistinguishably model even your voice. So, 10 years from now, Lord knows where exactly we're going to be, but for the next couple years, even at a voice level, you're perfectly fine. So it's getting there, but the full blown programmatically generated everything dynamic is going to be decades away.
So a lot of our listeners work in tech as leaders and managers, and when we talk to people, maybe we talk to a cybersecurity expert, we're talking about what's the latest and greatest thing. What should we be thinking about? What should we be doing when it comes to artificial intelligence? As a general technology infrastructure operations manager or leader, what should I be thinking about? What are some areas where there's good use cases for using this, and what are some of my concerns that I should be fearful about?
Yeah. Well, this is a very broad topic, and it's extremely important. So most of our folks, who we I guess speak to here at Emerj, are going to be internal digital transformation, innovation, strategy leaders, or functional business leaders with important objectives. Some of them are IT folks, like you just mentioned, and then the other half is folks who are consultants. So they're also serving kind of a strategist advisor role, but they're coming from the outside. If you're the person writing the code, you're not exactly our audience, and I'm not going to teach you very much about writing Python. But at Emerj, what we focus on is speaking to the heads of AI at companies like Raytheon, or the heads of machine learning at companies like Facebook, and really getting a sense of what's actually working at high-performing companies from a business and strategy perspective. So what leadership needs to focus on, John, more so than, oh, this use case is fun, or, oh, this use case is dangerous, is a broader understanding, what we call executive AI fluency. If anybody's ever on Google, you can type in executive AI fluency, and you can see exactly what we're talking about. There's kind of three components to that. But when we think about kind of skill sets of what somebody in a leadership position needs to understand, there's really three things. One is kind of a conceptual understanding of what can AI do and what can't AI do. So just a realistic bounding box of what AI is capable of. We have a couple good articles on that. There's all kinds of useful reading on that topic. But just broadly speaking, what is AI? How do data and algorithms interact? And what does this stuff look like in business? The second category, John, is a general, what we call a representative set of use cases for someone's industry. So if you work within the banking sector, to be able to understand some of the varied use cases within your space or within adjacent spaces, like let's say insurance, is useful. You don't necessarily have to know every use case ever used in the universe. Everything that Slack is doing at their high-tech unicorn, everything that Merck and Bayer are doing in the life sciences space. But you should at least begin with a representative set of use cases in your industry. There's a lot of places where you can look for that. If you want more of a business level understanding, Emerj is actually pretty good under the Insights tab, just emerj.com. We have a drop down for industry. So if you banking, whatever, you can search for topics and just find a lot of representative use cases. The third topic, John, which actually is talked about far less than it should be, and from here you can tell me where you want me to go deeper. But the third topic is an understanding of where AI fits into your general strategy as a business. This is not hyperbole at all to say that artificial intelligence, when it is a waste of money, it is a waste of money because projects were selected arbitrarily. We picked some kind of use case that looked neato, but we did not think about what capabilities do we really want to invest in? What capabilities are genuinely going to help us pull ahead of the market? What capabilities are aligned with our existing strategic priorities, and genuinely be able to invest and sink effort and transformation into technologies that are going to have a real longer term impact, as opposed to seem neat, seem fun, seem interesting, seem like our competitors are doing them in the near term. So project selection is a big issue, and having some alignment with strategic vision is one. So just to repeat those three, and then John, you can tell me where you want me to dive in. Conceptual understanding of what it does, representative set of understanding of use cases in your sector, and some understanding of how AI connects to your longer term strategic goals. If you have those three, now you can make your own smart decisions, and you don't have to listen to a schmo like me, tell you one magic use case you should go and do. So that's kind of how we'd advocate folks go about it.
Yeah, and I know, like for me, when I think about AI being a tech leader in a media organization, we think about how can we use this to automate certain processes? How can we improve our workflows? And I know, like just from a media standpoint, that we hear about things coming from Adobe and other companies about AI video editing and how there's AI QC where it can do quality control checks on making sure the audio is on the right channels, that it stays level, that it's at the right pitch, that the
Yeah.
color codings are correct, that there's no choppiness, there's no pixelation in the images. You can also do things where you can, like from what I've seen with the transcription software, you can put in like certain words that you want it to filter and edit out automatically. So like if you have a clean program and you don't want like the word damn on there, you can have damn
Yeah,
edited
yeah,
out
yeah. Okay.
and stuff through AI
Yep.
automatically and stuff like that. Is that the basic use cases that we're talking about? Or are we going much
I mean,
deeper and further?
that's one level within the industry, within the space of media. But in very cold frankness with you, John, as cold and as frank as a man can be, the media space is like 1/5 millionth of the AI spend out there.
Oh yeah.
So the
Yeah.
bulk of the dollars, like human American dollars being spent in this space, are being spent in the gigantic $1 trillion industries that shouldn't surprise anybody who's listening in, namely financial services. So that breaks down to banking, insurance, and wealth management primarily, although we might bundle credit cards under there. Really, those first three are just an ungodly amount of the GDP of the world, and certainly the developed world.
Mm-hmm.
Next up, in terms of gigantor sectors, would be retail and e-commerce. CPG can get rolled under there. 3 and 4 might roughly be, our life sciences and healthcare. Right now, there's a lot of reasons why I think life sciences is a more exciting space for AI adoption than healthcare proper, but there's a lot to go into there. And then manufacturing, heavy industry, transportation, those kind of spaces. So media is a really minuscule, hyper niche pocket where, all things considered, an almost imperceptible amount of the dollars and innovation of AI are going to go. Now, that said, I'm not saying it's insignificant. Adobe's a very fast-moving company. They're doing really exciting things. I'm very interested in the innovations in media. But when we talk about the use cases globally for AI, generally speaking, we're talking about kind of another set of use cases that's less niche. So of course, within the banking space, we have 1,000 niche use cases: detecting, fraudulent money wires, finding mortgage documents, all kinds of interesting niche type things. But a lot of the early use cases for artificial intelligence, to your point, John, are going to be finding efficiencies in existing workflows and finding efficiencies that really only AI can solve for. So document search and discovery is a nice, let's call it kind of an industry general use case. In any given enterprise, almost no matter how large, especially if it's a legacy enterprise that kind of came of age before the digital age, we are basically swimming and mired in a sea of documents, whether they be invoices, whether they be contracts, whatever the case may be. And being able to just find what we're looking for without having to log into 17 different data silos and know all the weird little permutations of search we need to do to find that stuff. Just being able to find what we're looking for, that alone, document search and discovery, is very industry agnostic, but is a substantial chunk of cross-industry natural language processing spend. And it's a good example of one of those anybody should be thinking about this kind of use cases. So there's a lot of ways to go here. But yeah, media is totally on the money there, John, but it's a very small sliver of the ecosystem.
Yeah. I was just trying to do relate it to something that I work with,
For sure.
regularly.
No.
Yeah, but
You
when you get to
understand that space. Those are all viable.
yeah,
viable
and let's say for everybody, we've always, I'm assuming everybody has gotten one of those things where they swipe their card somewhere and they get a text message that says, "Hey, did you actually do this?" Because this is an unusual pattern for you. I'm assuming that's an AI saying, "Hey, something's unusual here. We're going to let you know." And I'm sure that happens in business too. Like if somebody's doing card testing on a site or some kind of fraudulent activity, your bank, whether it be Chase or Wells Fargo, whoever, is going to send notification says, "Hey, this is violating these norms." And then in cybersecurity, you hear about a lot with companies like Dark Trace, where they're having tools that will monitor network activity and endpoint management activity and say, "Hey, we've noticed that this user usually doesn't copy more than 100 gigabytes a day of files, and today they copied 20
2000
terabytes.
or whatever.
Yeah. What's going on? And let's shut down this machine and let's figure out what's going on. And sometimes that's a precursor to the person leaving and going to be, exfiltrating data or something to that effect.
Yeah. I mean, those examples of anomaly detection are great. When people in the financial services space, particularly in banking, when I'm forced in very short time horizons to explain where the near-term ROI is for AI, I certainly don't want people to only think about AI this way. But a really short answer to that would be anomaly detection. There's a lot of great use cases for AI, which are really natural fits for the technology, which are essentially just detecting patterns that are different than normal or patterns that are known to be bad. So if we think about credit card fraud, there's all kinds of existing rules in place. So we've got some great interviews on this. We have a show called the AI and Business Podcast. So people that want to know about use cases, we talk about kind of the financial impact and specific ROI of AI use cases in the AI and Business Podcast. One of our great guests there, not that long ago, was one of the heads of machine learning research at American Express. And a huge preponderance of their focus is detecting, did somebody actually make this purchase or not? And he goes into kind of the evolution of that technology. But the short and narrow of it here is that there are a set of if-then rules, right? If it's from, I'm just making something up, by the way. If it's from Bulgaria and it's over $8 million of a transfer or something, like that, then it needs to go to this level of screening. Like I just invented that. There's of course, just a random one, but they have a set of hard rules. So hard rules exist. However, there's all kinds of weird, wacky, wild infringements on the edges that have not been coded and really can't be coded because they're evolving. These are active people that are trying to fraudulently, go after us. This is kind of an antagonistic scenario here. And so we need to be able to pick up on differences in behavior that we haven't detected, haven't hard coded. And so anti-money laundering, credit card fraud, payment fraud, user and account related fraud, or misuse. And as you mentioned, cybersecurity are really great examples of where machine learning can do what it does best, which is, hey, machine, show me a pattern that looks like this, or show me a pattern that really looks very different from this that I need to look at. And financial services has plenty of those. And retail, a lot of industries have plenty of those. So that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah, for sure. And, let's say I'm again, going back to the scenario, I'm a technical leader and we're interested in investing in a tool to help us with cybersecurity. Because, the more you hear about, we just had the pipeline ransomware, the meat companies getting hit with ransomware. We want a tool to help us. What are some of the things I should be concerned about when it comes to AI? Is there false flags? Are there, it's one of those things that if you've never dived into it, haven't researched it at all. What are some of the concerns? How should I do my homework? What should I learn about this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I mentioned, the strongest position for leadership is to have some level of AI fluency, understand conceptually what the tech can do, understand representative use cases, and know, relatively speaking, where it intersects with your strategic goals so that you can really know where to double down. And maybe you can also understand what's kind of a toy, what's kind of random, what's kind of disconnected from really where you should be spending your R&D dollars, because a lot of AI is basically R&D. I mean, this stuff is not plug and play. There's a lot of iteration. When you talk about risks, generally speaking, when people bring this up, they're expecting an answer. And by the way, I don't think this is necessarily a bad answer, but I'll get around to it. They're expecting an answer like, well, AI can give you more false positives, or AI can be racially biased, or AI can be, and sure, it can be all those things.
Yeah.
But if we look at damage done by AI projects to a business thus far. Yes, there's some projects where we're scanning people's faces and we certainly want to identify all of our employees accurately, no matter what race they are. Sure. Okay, sure. However, if we're scanning mortgage docs, we don't really have to worry about being all that, the race isn't really involved there. We're just looking for like numbers, and we're looking for letters, and it's not as much of a problem. But the bigger damage is done when folks go in willy-nilly in terms of their expectations around AI. So even right now, the majority of enterprise AI use cases and applications and adoption is occurring almost under the guise as if it's IT. Almost under the guise as if we bring in the right vendor, we bring in the right partner, we plug this stuff in, here's my financial ROI. Okay, I want to detect more of this by 3 months from now.
Right.
I want to have a higher number of this, let's say a higher amount of cart value for my e-commerce site, 3 months from now, something like that. And the fact of the matter is, that's really not how AI works. So artificial intelligence is a very iterative process, and that means we really need to think about the areas where we want to apply AI in much more of an R&D sense. It's really not possible to know if the data that we have in this space and the use case that we hope we can unlock with this data is actually going to work out, and if we can do it in week one or year one even. So there's a little bit of uncertainty around artificial intelligence projects. It's really iteration. It's a change in culture and in mindset. So the bigger risk is not, oh, by golly, we plugged in this document search program and now we have a big PR gaffe because it, I don't know, did something bad to our employees of XYZ race or gender. The bigger risk is, whoa, we kind of went into this just kind of spending money and expecting this thing to turn around and deliver an ROI, instead of really thinking about the fact that this first project really needs to be seen as an opportunity to build AI maturity, an opportunity to learn how to adopt these technologies, and an opportunity to really get under the hood of our own data assets and figure out what their value is. And if we're expecting a tomorrow ROI, we're really probably not doing AI at all. We're probably not only going to lose money on this project, but lose the opportunity to learn and fall farther and farther behind. So if you were to ask me today, what are the risks? Like what damage has been done in enterprise? Bad expectations about the time to ROI and about a lack of expectations about the requirements of building AI maturity, which I can explore for you, John, are really where damage is happening. So having a firmer grounding of expectations around what AI adoption looks like and about what AI maturity is the biggest way to avoid risk in a general sense in the enterprise.
So how do we sell the idea of implementing AI in our company up the chain to management? If you said like, it's a learning process, you're not, if you come in with the immediate ROI, which a lot of executives want, they want that immediate ROI. So how do I sell this?
No, this is an incredibly important question. And John, you might be surprised to hear, or you might not, that a huge preponderance of our market research effort is focused on exactly this. We need to have heads of innovation get the C-suite to say yes to projects. And also, John, not miscommunicate and misguide the C-suite to thinking they're getting a magic bullet. So we need both of those. We need the right expectations about, realistic, time horizons and return on investment and things like that. And we also need to actually move the damn project forward. And the same thing with consultants. We work with hundreds and hundreds of consultants around the United States and around the world who need to, help their clients with AI. And, I'm sure there are vendors out there who are just promising the world, and sometimes they're winning projects. But I'll tell you what, those folks are building really bad reputations, and they're not doing their clients any service by making promises they can't keep. So the way that this gets done, John, this is outlandishly important for your audience to understand. The way that this gets done is we need to frame ROI in more ways than short-term financial. Now, is short-term financial important? Yes. Is it ever going to be left out of a pitch to the C-suite? Never. Not one time, John, is it ever going to be left out of a pitch to the C-suite. Never. Not one time. However, if we are missing the other kinds of ROI, we are missing the boat. If your audience goes on Google and they type in, I think it's called the 3 kinds of AI ROI. Let me see if it actually shows up under that. Yeah, the 3 kinds of AI ROI. They will find an article and an infographic from Emerj, but I'll briefly talk it out right now for you and your audience here. The way that artificial intelligence projects need to be sold upstairs is under through the language of 3 different kinds of ROI. And I'll explain actually how this is done in practice. There's a whole art and science to this. There's a whole sales process for AI-related services that I'm sure we won't have the time to go into. But the basic concept is useful for everybody, whether you're in the enterprise itself and you're selling upstairs, or whether you're selling from the outside. The idea is the same. So what we see very smart companies doing, John, to both set the right expectations and build pipeline and close deals, is they frame ROI in 3 ways. The first way is measurable ROI. That is to say, by what kind of time horizons might I expect what kind of improvements in my efficiencies, my revenues, or my risk? Maybe this is also customer service scores, right? Something measurable, often financial, but not always financial, but it's measurable and often on some level time bound. So what am I expecting to spend, and then what am I expecting to kind of make in terms of return on investment? The second, John, never to be left out, never, is strategic ROI. How will this project bring me closer to my strategic anchors? Or let me explain what a strategic anchor is, John. This could be a 3 to 5 year goal for the company. This could be our digital transformation vision that we need to move closer to if we want to win market share, if we want to become the company we want to become. It could be a current technology thrust, a current effort that's very important for the company already. Maybe it has to do with customer service or about efficiencies or about whatever. But strategic goals, long-term goals, current thrust, or vision. How does this align to those? How does this roll up under one of those mandates and support that mandate? If we don't tie to strategy at all, we are absolutely going to flop at the pilot stage. Absolutely, John. I'm telling you from vendor experience, from consultant experience, from enterprise experience. It is not a good move to leave out strategy. It always has to be part of the conversation. And the third, which is really something that Emerj beats the drum on and that very, very smart companies do intuitively, is what we refer to as capability ROI. Here's the truth of the matter, John. AI transformation in the enterprise is not just how many AI programs can we jack into the existing IT infrastructure. AI transformation is having a better data infrastructure, having a better set of talent mix, have a better way of communicating within our company, having a better level of executive understanding to continuously unlock this technology. We need to evolve as a company, not just jack in new tools onto the side of our existing programs. And so capability ROI, John, is something like the following. Hey, Mr. Buyer, by the time this project is over, we are shooting for some kind of an improvement of your cart value. Let's say this is an e-commerce recommendation engine, okay? We're looking for X kind of a realistic improvement in your cart value for unlogged in users, whatever metric we're using, right? I'm just giving you one. So that could be our measurable ROI. This fits in with our strategic mandate to keep up with Amazon and in terms of actually beating Amazon for better recommendations in our niche. Let's say we're selling something niche, John, like, we only do like urban apparel or something like that, right? Like I'm just giving you a random example, but in our space, we want to have better, more personalized recommendations, have a better personal connection than even the giants like Amazon. That's a strategic mandate. Like within 3 to 5 years, it's what we want to be. So we can tie that AI project to that. And then capability ROI would be, in order to make this recommendation engine work, we're going to have to clean up our analytics data, separate login from non-logged in users, and we're going to have to track more features of their experience, what they add to cart, what they take away from cart. We need to roll in their refund activity in addition to their purchase activity. And so by the end of this project, Mr. Buyer, in addition to the financial ROI, we're going to have a data infrastructure more capable of being unlocked for future projects. This is going to move us forward in our maturity, not just move us forward in our near-term ROI. We're not building technical debt. We're building a better foundation. And now look, can you only promise capability ROI and get money from executives? Of course not, John. Of course not. However, if you do not include anything other than measurable ROI, you're going to get a thumbs up from leadership, and then you're going to look absolutely horrible when you can't deliver the push button magical ROI that you promised off the get. So strategic and capability ROI are 100% critical elements, and it's what successful companies do to sell AI upstairs.
So let's say let's get to the scenario. I'm interested in AI, let's say for customer service, maybe parsing emails, maybe sending responses back, maybe chatbots. I don't know, just our first testing the water with AI. And I want to send this, to our executives. I want to talk about it. And what is that conversation going to look like? We talked about the ROIs to pitch, but what is that? What am I expecting to get back from him? Because I know everybody's different. Every leader's different. What are some of the common questions that get asked back whenever you're making this pitch that maybe aren't ROI related, that are just about, what does this expose us to? What does this do to our perception, to our customer perception of our business? Because I'm sure that's got some, play into this as well.
That's a huge factor, John. It'll of course vary by situation, but I'm going to try to answer your question the best I can. One thing I'd like to say off the get is that customer-facing AI applications are almost never the first applications an enterprise should tinker with. There's a lot of reasons for this. I could literally talk to you for 45 minutes just about the unique challenges of customer-facing AI tools and interfaces. The short example of describing this is as follows. If I build for you, John, a document search and discovery tool, and this thing gives you results twice as good as your normal search results in your normal enterprise kind of content search platform, it gives you results twice as good as those 80% of the time. And then 20% of the time, it flops miserably and you just got to go search the regular way. if I did that and 80% of the time you had way faster, better answers, you would probably say, as an employee of the company, yeah, that's a pretty cool tool. This thing works. I like it.
Yeah.
But if you're a customer and even 3% of the time you get a wildly divergent experience from what you're expecting, you're probably not going to be okay with that. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I'm envisioning myself now on Google and typing in like my name and it pulling up,
like Hillary Clinton. Or something.
Exactly.
So that's just going to be very jarring. You're gonna seriously consider Bing potentially in that moment. As much as
maybe not.
I probably haven't thought of it. You're like, probably not. Yeah. To be honest, if Hillary Clinton came up for half my searches, I would probably still use Google now that I think about it. But you understand what I mean. So that requires a much tighter kind of iteration cycle and loop, and much tighter way of kind of bounding and controlling our results and monitoring how the algorithm is performing. And without developing those skills, without you like your martial arts analogies here, John, without making sure we kind of know how to spar and hit a bag, we shouldn't really be jumping in the ring with somebody bigger than us. So customer facing is never what I advocate for early enterprise projects in the financial services space. The sexy, cool stuff is almost always customer service facing. And I often have to play the role of devil's advocate as a market research leader here to sort of talk about, why that might not be number one on our list. But I'll answer your question regardless. So you're saying, hey, Dan, we're going to do some customer service AI application and we're going to go bring this to the C-suite. What is the C-suite going to say to us? Is this basically what you're asking?
Yeah, exactly.
Great. So questions you can expect to get. Generally, the C-suite asks the kind of questions that I really like. And in fact, at Emerj, again, we don't write for the people that write code. We don't teach any linear algebra. We talk about communicating value. And so C-suite is basically our language here. They're going to ask, what is this going to cost, roughly speaking? And what kind of return on investment am I going to get, roughly speaking? They're not going to want to know what a support vector machine is. They're not going to want to know, the intricate nuances of Google's hardware versus NVIDIA's hardware. They're genuinely not going to want to know that unless they're maybe a CTO and they're AI savvy in some sense. They're going to talk roughly about what is this going to cost me and what is this going to make me. And John, I'll tell you the difference between an informed, so an AI catalyst in language here at Emerj, an AI catalyst is someone who catalyzes AI change in an enterprise. Generally, they are an internal functional business leader or innovation leader or transformation leader, or they are an external catalyst of a service provider, consultant type, possibly a vendor. To be a poor catalyst, if you are a very, very bad catalyst, what you do is you talk about the costs in as minimal a sense as you can explain them. You mainly maybe just talk about financial costs. Well, it's going to cost this much to work with this vendor and whatnot. And then you just talk about ROI in financial sense. You say, well, we could probably improve cart value by this amount, or, we could improve, we might be able to improve retention by this amount, or average customer service score for these kinds of cases, by this amount or whatever. So you just talk measurable ROI and you just talk financial cost. If you're an informed AI catalyst, if you want to not only do good in terms of the results of the project, which that should be your goal, but also, do good in terms of both near and long-term positive impact from the project, then what you want to do is you want to address what is this going to cost me with a more complete picture. You want to talk about potentially what it's going to cost to work with the vendors, but you also want to talk about what kind of talent mix are we going to need here? What kind of talent mix are we going to need? What kind of new way of collaborating between our data science department and some of our customer service leads are we actually going to need, and for how long, in order to get the system trained? What might be the maintenance requirements long-term to keep this system accurate and to allow it to do what it's doing? Let's say, for example, John, our use case is routing incoming tickets. So a much easier use case than chatbots would be basically taking an incoming ticket, whether it be from text or from email or whatever, and basically sending it to the right department. Is this a refund? Is this a delivery problem? Is this a product inquiry? What is this? And then routing it to the right person who can handle it. So routing is a nice low-hanging fruit AI use case. It's much easier than conversation. So let's say that's what we're doing. We'll want to talk about all those costs. Again, what are going to be the maintenance requirements long-term? What's going to be what kind of changes to the data infrastructure do we need to make? Do we need to start collecting new data in a new way? Let's be honest about that. But then, John, again, this is critical here. We're going to come back to the three kinds of ROI. When we talk about, well, what's it going to make for me? So again, they're going to ask, what's it going to cost and what am I going to get? When you talk about what are you going to get, don't just talk about, well, we could reduce, our customer service XYZ by this amount. you want to be able to also tie to strategy. Talk about the strategic mandates that that this AI project would support, and also critically talk about the capability ROI. I'll tell you why, John. When you talk about the true costs of AI, we talk about infrastructure, we talk about talent, we talk about new ways of collaboration, we talk about maintenance. All those things sound like do those sound good or bad to you, John, as a C-suite guy?
Bad.
Bad. They sound annoying. They sound like hurdles. They sound prickly. They sound obnoxious. They sound way harder than IT. Why can't I just plug this thing in? What the hell? So they all sound bad. They all sound bad. So you know what happens, John? People don't talk about them. They let the C-suite learn the hard way. Oh yeah, by the way, boss, we did have to hire some new people. We did have to do some data infra. And now all of a sudden our expenses balloon, our expectations are off, and the project gets canceled. That has happened thousands of times in enterprises around the country and wasted billions of dollars. And it is still not really addressed as frankly as we're talking about it here. It's really surprising. So what we want to do is take those real costs, which we do have to be honest about, and we want to frame them in terms of capability ROI. Yes, here's the things we're going to have to do with our data. But boss, here's the deal. Our strategic mandate is to improve customer experience by XYZ. We're already stuck in these silos. We've been talking about getting out of these silos. When we layer on this new type of data, we harmonize these things between databases. This is, regardless of what happens with this project, this is part of the evolution of our data infrastructure in the first place, and it's going to be part of the win of making this project move forward. We're going to be able to use this to build a better foundation. So that's a very different description than, yeah, boss, there's going to be some data work too. It's going to cost you. It's going to cost you, boss. That's a tough way to say it. What we need to do is be honest about all the kinds of resources it'll require and costs, and then honest about all the kinds of ROI. And the companies who can articulate capability and strategy ROI well are the companies who can not just make the first sale, but can actually keep the customer. There's a lot of startups, John, in the last 5 years who can make a good rah-rah shish boom bah short-term financial ROI promise, and then who have absolutely no goodwill with any customer they've worked with. And so the difference is, can you be honest about resources and ROI? And can you frame that well? That's what masters who make sales and who keeps customers.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because there's so many, I hate to paint people in certain lights, but you get so many calls from potential vendors that just want to talk about how much money you're going to save by using this product. And they forget about, like you talked about, the time, the maintenance, the things that go into it to really, and the true benefits long-term that you may receive from this, because they're all about that short-term ROI that you mentioned earlier. And
it's fine to lead with that. Like if companies say, hey, we can save you XYZ, it's fine to lead with that. The part that becomes not just unethical, which is its own problem, but the part that becomes a real disservice to the customer and ultimately to the seller, because the seller is not going to be able to keep anybody if they flop in their expectations. There's a lot of vendor companies who will tell you about, how rough it was to have the wrong or bloviated expectations off the get-go. But it's the real problem is when they don't even bring that up when you get down the line. So I think it's fine if companies want to use their marketing and get on a first phone call by talking about their promise of what they can do. But if they aren't frank about the bigger picture in terms of what it's going to take to enable this, it's ultimately doing a disservice to them and to you. And I think luckily now, compared to 3 years ago, a lot of vendors know this and are being much more frank about AI. Very few of them are doing capability and strategy ROI well. Very few of them have this pitch mastered. But more of them did than before. And so that's a good trend.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think you are seeing some of the upside now. How has COVID maybe accelerated or decelerated the use of AI in businesses?
Man, the only thing that I feel very strongly about here in terms of saying with not a level of certainty, but seems to be a relatively clear trend, is that it has widened the divide between who is already incredibly digitally enabled and who is not. Now, a year ago, if you were to ask me, I would have expected by now to have much more gruesome financial consequences of COVID. And I am not an economist, and so your listeners should be well aware of that. But it does feel as though somehow we're kind of staving off what feels like an inevitable consequence of pausing the economy. But again, I'm not an economist by any means, so I won't make any predictions or projections. I would have thought that it would have had a much more detrimental impact on R&D budgets than it has, because the economy has not bottomed out. And so a lot of companies still have money to spend and are still spending on transformation. And you see companies like AWS and companies like DataRobot and companies like Dataiku, growing in a huge way during COVID. So So there is some broad adoption, but I think big picture, it is widening the chasm between firms that were already running pretty digitally nimble and firms who were not. I think the firms who were not were hobbled much more so than the digitally nimble firms by COVID. And so they are even less likely to be able to invest in the technologies that will keep them from being dinosaurs. So it's very hard to say without going industry by industry precise impact. I will say it's been less of an overall reduction of R&D budget than I expected, and it is almost undeniably widened the chasm between those who are already speedy and savvy and more AI and data mature, and those who are not.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you too. It seems like it has widened that group, whereas companies that may have dabbled into it now are probably a little bit more hesitant, and the ones that are already in it are kind of going full steam in that direction.
Yeah, yeah.
So what? We talked a little bit about some of the concerns and some of the risks that could come into developing AI. And a lot of people use the machine learning versus AI. And from a researcher, what are the differences or the similarities between those two terms? And am I saying one right or wrong?
You said machine learning and AI?
Yeah. Because I hear people
Yeah.
say, no, that's not AI, that's machine learning. And other people say, well, yeah.
Honestly, well, look,
Are they one and the same now?
there's some circles where that distinction is relevant. So we actually have on emerj.com, we have, if people type in what is AI Emerj, what is machine learning Emerj, we have definitions based on interviews with literally the leaders in the field. So our what is machine learning definition is in part informed by Yoshua Bengio himself, who replied to that call for feedback, whenever we wrote that article 4 years ago or something like that. So we have clean definitions for this. The basic idea is this: computer science is a big field. Imagine a gigantic circle. Inside of that circle is a smaller circle called artificial intelligence. There's not many good definitions for AI, but we can think about it broadly as, and I like this definition, when computers do things that previously humans had to do. That's roughly AI. So that's an unfortunately large bucket, but there it is. We have a bucket. Within AI is machine learning. Machine learning is a particular way of training artificial intelligence based on data sets. So not pre-programming things with a bunch of if-then rules, but being able to learn from the world, learn from instances, whether they be images, they be text, whatever, and then being able to train outputs based on that learning. So not pre-programming knowledge, but being able to feed knowledge into a machine learning by properly labeled or unlabeled data sets, being able to develop capability in a machine. And so machine learning is the sexy stuff. Machine learning is what's cool and new. Machine learning is the reason why AI is taking off, is because ML is so broadly capable compared to old school AI. So ML is really the wave that's making all this take off. However, if you're a business person, when we're talking to the C-suite, they're not like, wait a second. Is that a support vector machine? Or is that an instance of deep learning, or is that recurrent neural networks, or is that's not really the main problem here. The main problem is, what is this going to cost and what is this going to make? So functionally speaking, when we're talking about an AI application in business, normally when we say AI, it means that it involves machine learning in some sense. So today they are more or less the same. There's some little nitty gritty corner cases around, let's say, natural language processing, where some of that work can be done without ML proper, actually having neural networks and all that hoopla. But generally speaking, bucketing things under AI works. And normally today, it essentially means it involves ML. If something is totally pre-programmed, normally we're going to just refer to it as IT. If it involves ML, generally we're going to call it AI. But a lot of these tools involve a little bit of both, John. So it's never just neural networks, right? It's a conglomeration of tools. But AI is today, in a functional sense, if you read a Harvard Business Review article, if you read a Forbes article, if you read an article on Emerj, generally, an AI vendor today, if we were to say that, or an AI tool, would be a tool or a vendor that leverages machine learning in some way, shape, or form. So they have more or less at a business level merged into one, and 99% of the time, that's just fine.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've been at conferences where people have talked, and you have these purists that get a little upset when you say AI, but you mean machine learning, and vice versa.
And that's fine. If people want to get upset, again, for the really technical folks where their life depends on, do we write this in Spark or do we write this in Python, right? Like for those people, sure, let's go ahead and argue about technical stuff. Generally speaking, like I'm basically never paid by people who write code. Sort of almost ever. I mean, if they do, then their primary responsibilities are actually the business. It's not the code. And so we tend to communicate to the audience that cuts the checks and the folks that are steering the business side. And for them, it's less important than a conceptual understanding. It's just a useful kind of bucket word there.
Yeah. So, Daniel, man, I really appreciate having you on. How can people find out more about the work that you're doing and learn more about AI and connect with you?
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned before, we write a lot about the return on investment of AI. And we have a webinar. So some of your listeners, I'm sure, are kind of consultants and service providers. A lot of the folks who read Emerj are either consultants or service providers who are looking to evolve into AI, or they might be people that are looking to kind of maybe become an AI strategist or become an AI advisor. And so we have a short webinar that's been extremely popular the last 4 months called How to Start and Grow an AI Services Company. And that's literally put on by me. People can go to emerj.com/web1. So that's WEB and then the number one. That's emerj.com/WEB1. And yeah, they can subscribe for that webinar and learn more about what it looks like to actually sell AI as a consultant, or even step out on their own and kind of get into the AI space. So that would be a good way to catch up with us. But otherwise, people can just find me on Twitter and say hi.
Yeah. Also, tell them about your podcast too. You got some good stuff
Sure.
out there.
Yeah. No, definitely. So it's a real pleasure to be on your show, John. So I appreciate it. And yeah, if people are interested specifically in AI use cases and AI trends, we have a show called the AI in Business Podcast. So we've interviewed, again, as I mentioned, everybody from the head of AI at Raytheon to the head of core machine learning at Facebook, right on down to folks at really exciting, interesting startups working on cool use cases. So if you want to have a better pair of AI opportunity goggles, be able to look at your own business and find those cool opportunities where AI might be able to be applied and leveraged for advantage, you can learn from some outlandishly far ahead folks on the AI in Business podcast. So just Apple Podcasts, AI in Business, that might be fun for people to tune in. But otherwise, the webinar is just emerj.com/WEB1. If you are a consultant or thinking about becoming one, AI is definitely a part of your future if you're crissing and crossing with tech. And so I hope you'll be able to join me there.
All right. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate having you on.
Awesome, John. Thanks again.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some T-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.